Hi folks, and welcome to Philosophy According to Eddie. We're going to be looking at Plato versus Aristotle in this video, weighing up the objections to each one and seeing which one has a better case in terms of rationalism versus empiricism, forms versus causes, and so forth. We're going to start by looking at Plato, some of the objections to Plato's understandings of reality. See the Plato video if you haven't already. There are a lot of objections from Aristotle, it's fair to say. All of these in blue are Aristotle. Now Aristotle was Plato's pupil, but he had issues with Plato's rationalism. He was an empiricist and therefore went for a different approach. So he criticised Plato thusly. He asked, what is good? How do we define good? And if you're trying to define it as one thing, how can good can mean different things? Is there such thing as a good virus? Just because it's good at killing people doesn't mean it is actually good in terms of it being moral. So how do you differentiate between the two? Is the form of the good the form of morality, or the form of perfection in terms of it doing what it should do? And if it's perfection, why doesn't that include perfect morality as well? More technically, a good human and a good horse are going to be different to each other. Why? Surely good is good, and everything that's good should be like good. Shouldn't end up being reflected off into being human and horse. Some would say that that's corruption that comes from the change into the world of appearances, but still, it's a good question to ask. Perfection does not necessarily mean that it's eternal, Aristotle would say, whereas Plato thinks that eternality immediately makes something better. Just because it lasts a long time doesn't mean it's better. For example, a mayfly, which only lasts for a couple of days, is more beautiful, and therefore surely closer to the form of beauty, than a concrete building that could last for 100 years and yet still be very ugly. Why does no one study the forms? If you're a carpenter, why don't you study the form of the chair or the form of the table if they're so perfect? Why can't we do that? Aristotle would ask. Now that's quite a weak argument, admittedly, because of course then Plato would say, well, that's because you can't get to the forms. You're in a different world. You have to use your rational knowledge to achieve it. But it's a fair point. Why not sit there thinking about tables? Why do we have to see them in order to build them? Aristotle would also say, on a sort of practical level, there's no practical value to the forms. It doesn't really give us anything that we can use. For example, the form of health. Well, nobody has perfect health in the real world. It's only the variance of being healthy or less healthy. The form itself isn't any good to help us. It's a very theoretical knowledge, this idea of sort of rational thinking and working it out by theory. But we know from our observation of the real world that having a theoretical knowledge does not mean that you know how to do something. For example, I could gain a theoretical knowledge of how to perform brain surgery. If I've never done it, I suspect you probably wouldn't want me to try on you. Practical knowledge is important, and Plato does not take this into account. And also, some things lack forms. For example, numbers. There is a form for number 1, form for number 2, all the way up to infinity, but there's no form of the number itself. So how can that be? It doesn't make sense, because otherwise, if you had two forms, if you had the number 1, which has a form of 1, but also has a form of number, which form creates it? It doesn't quite work out. There are other philosophers who've got problems with Plato. A technical kind of approach to it is no justification at all for what's known as the ratio, the idea that the form of the good bleeds into things in our world, or the form of a table bleeds into the table. There's no evidence that how much of the form gets in to the real world. There's no justification for it. Plato doesn't actually explain how that happens. He just says, oh well, it's in this order. Like, if you think about the divided line, why is maths so high? Why are images so low? There's no justification given, or not a good watertight one, if all of these things have a form and all of these things have a level of perfection to them. There's no evidence for the forms. We can't see them, we can't access them, so there's no evidence for them. It's all very attractive, and Plato does write well. It really does. It's very imaginative, it's got a lot of flourish to it, but actually there's no evidence for it. And in terms of empirical evidence, there's just none. There's a lot of strong arguments for empirical knowledge and for rational knowledge, but every empirical argument knocks down Plato's value of rational knowledge. Now there are other rationalists like René Descartes who make good use of rationalism, but the empiricists, every good empirical argument really does harm Plato's. To go a stage further, Karl Popper suggests that Plato can't find any certainty in our world. It changes, it's inconsistent, and so therefore, in order to explain it, because he can't, he just has to invent the world of forms. As if to say, well, I can't explain this world, so there must be a different world, and that causes this world to be like it is. Not a very strong argument, really. And again, going further on from that, A.J. Ayer and the Polish philosopher Kotobiński argue that not all nouns link to objects, and therefore not everything can have a form. So take good and beauty. Is there a form of nothing? Because we would say, there is nothing in the drawer. Well, in that sense, nothing isn't actually anything. I mean, by definition, it's not anything. There's nothing there. There is literally no thing. But we still use that word as a noun. And therefore, according to Plato, there should be a form of nothing, which doesn't make any logical sense. So, Plato does come in for quite a lot of criticism. So let's compare that to Aristotle. The objections to Aristotle are perhaps less numerous than towards Plato, but they are nonetheless important. From a scientific perspective, before we get to the philosophical perspective, scientists would partially criticise the crudeness of his methods. He didn't have modern instruments to measure the world with, so his observations were really limited to his five senses. He did very well. So it's only a partial criticism, but he could only get so far. Would he have come up with different ideas had he used modern equipment? Philosophically speaking, the efficient cause causes a lot of problems. Because it's only really named. It's not really explained. The efficient cause is that someone builds something, yeah, but it doesn't explain why the efficient cause exists. It just kind of gives the name. So a lot of people have issue with that. Also, the idea of purpose. Purpose is a bit vague. Does purpose mean that someone has set a purpose for you that you're going to achieve? Well, initially that would seem, yeah, okay, great. But if the prime mover isn't aware of us, then surely it can't do that. It can't set a purpose. So purpose must therefore be us giving ourselves purpose, giving ourselves drive, giving ourselves a reason to do things. All very well and good for humans. We have a drive within us. But what about plants? Do they have an inbuilt sense of purpose that they must grow? Probably not, really. What about a rock? I can't imagine it sat there feeling that it's not fulfilling its purpose. So the question is purpose something human, like uniquely human, that we're trying to sort of suggest other things have like essentially anthropomorphizing them, giving them human traits that they don't really have? Or do these things have an intrinsic purpose, something within them, a real purpose that's been given to them, and if so, where's it come from? Either way, it leads to a difficult stage. Bertrand Russell came up with the fallacy of composition. Just because all the parts of something have got certain properties doesn't mean that the thing that has been finally created will have the same properties. For example, raw chicken isn't really edible, but you will. Fire is not edible. A saucepan is not edible. But cooked chicken, using all three parts, is edible. So just because the first three have got that inedible property doesn't mean the cooked chicken will also be inedible. And therefore, humans, the bits of us, well, I mean, theoretically all of the bits of us work in some way and have a purpose. Our eyes are for seeing, our hands are for doing dexterous work, our legs are for walking. But that doesn't mean because all the parts of us have a purpose that we have a purpose. So that's an issue. Existentialists would say that there is no purpose to the world. It just exists. Why give it a purpose? Why are you trying to make this complicated? There is no reason. We just have to go out there and accept that we have no purpose. Is there really only one prime mover? Where's the evidence? Could there not be several movers? Just as little evidence for one as of several. The Big Bang seems to be an explosion away from the centre of the universe. So how is God, the prime mover, attracting in that situation? Surely everything's flying outwards. Now you could argue this, the CF there meaning compare against. You could argue that the Mobius loop, i.e. the never-ending infinity loop, which goes from being, if you've got like a piece of paper and you make a Mobius loop, it's only one-sided, so it becomes the outside and then it becomes the inside again. You could argue that God is on the outside of the universe in a sort of Mobius type way and is attracting everything towards the outside of the universe because God is all around. Either way, it's a bit tenuous. And what about other theories of God? Aristotle's theory of God has got no more evidence than the Abrahamic theory of God, or Hindu beliefs about various gods, or Buddhist beliefs about no gods. It's an equal lack of evidence. So which one do you accept? It's important with both Plato and Aristotle to be reflective, and for the rest of the philosophy course, as well as the ethics course and the religion course, but particularly the philosophy. Reflect on what the objections are, how strong these objections are. Which one do you accept and why? It's got to be based on evidence. So any reading that's done has got to be based on how does it support, reject, criticise, and how well does it do it. So this example between Aristotle and Plato leaves you in the position to think which one has got the stronger argument. And for that, only you can make the decision. So thanks for watching. Any questions, let me know. See you next time.